Hello, everybody. So, we are starting global expansion. And how does that happen, you ask yourselves? Why, ocean travel, of course. So, our focus on this week's topic is going to be on cultures, on new cultural exchanges, and how, because of European expansion, a lot of these amazing cultures were forever destroyed. So, yeah, diving right in then. We're going to talk about global exchange before European showed up. Take a look at what's happening outside of Europe. Just ignore this for now. But what's happening here? Look at all of this trade involving Indian Ocean, the traditional Silk Road, of course. And then eventually Portugal starts getting involved. So let's talk the Indian Ocean. Southeast Asia was connected by trade from at least the 1st century CE. This we know. Malay, Chinese, and Arab merchants used the monsoon winds to establish trade routes in the Indian Ocean. These trading routes flourished, especially when the rise of Islam created new markets and new networks of Muslim traders. The Chinese Ming Dynasty, as you already know, sponsored a series of voyages to the Indian Ocean between 1405 and 1433. These were the voyages of Zheng He, and they were carried on a grand scale involving fleets of over 60 large treasure ships and hundreds of smaller support vessels. And these ships carried out luxury goods, silk, precious metals, and it also stimulated diplomatic relations with various African and Asian states. And you know, spices are traveling. We've got Spice Islands, we've got the best cotton in the world, the best silk in the world, some of the only crops you can find right here. Everybody wants a piece of this trade because with delicious spices and luxury goods comes lots and lots of money. So to take a look at Zheng He's voyages, we'll come back to him a little later. The Pacific Ocean. So just a quick review for your guys. Over a period of several thousand years, people originally from Asia crossed the water to settle the islands of the East Indies, New Guinea, the Melanesian and Polynesian Islands, New Zealand, and other Pacific islands out to Hawaii. The Polynesian use of sweet potatoes, which were domesticated in South America, suggests they may have actually reached the Americas. Polynesian migration and establishment of colonies was aided by the development of large double-hulled canoes that used both paddlers and sails, and they navigated by the stars and their observation of ocean currents and evidence of the land. So here's that Polynesian triangle that you saw early on this year. The Atlantic Ocean. The Vikings, my people. During the relatively warm centuries of the early Middle Ages, the Vikings explored and settled Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland, which at the time was called Vinland. A colder climate returned after 1200, and the northern settlements in Greenland and the settlement in Newfoundland were abandoned. A few southern Europeans and Africans attempted to explore the Atlantic in the 13th and 14th centuries. Voyagers from Genoa in 1291 and from Mali in the 1300s set out for the Atlantic and never returned. No, we don't really know what happened to them. They might have just stayed. Genoese and Portuguese explorers discovered and settled the Madeiras, the Azores, and the Canaries in the 14th century. In the Americas, the Arawak from South America had colonized the Lesser and Greater Antilles by the year 1000. The Carib followed, first taking over the Arawak settlements in the Lesser Antilles, and then in the late 15th century, the Greater Antilles. So here's a map of where the Vikings went. La 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 la. And let's talk about exploration and settlement. What does that look like? Look at this, guys. People come, they travel. We've got our Polynesian voyages here. As everyone's exploring, bringing new cultures, this is how you have the first crops being transported. A couple units from now, we'll be talking about the Columbian Exchange. But for now, this is how crops made it from here out to here. And then eventually, well, you can't see it, but if you keep going, eventually you'll hit the Americas. Okay, this is not a good map. I apologize. Arawak homeland, though, folks. All right, and the islands that we were discussing. Azores, the Madeiras, and the Canaries, where they're originally from, what this land looks like. All right. European exploration. Guys, this is a lot of territory. So take a look. Everything in purple is controlled or claimed by Spain. What you see here is controlled by the Portuguese. And for right now, this is really all we care about, are Spain and Portugal. Eventually, we will start talking about England, France, and the Dutch, but that's not this week. So a bit more. I know they're on the map. There's not much I can do about that. But take a look at where they're going. Columbus's voyages, Ponce de Leon, Cortez, Pizarro. We'll talk about them all, guys. So the motives for exploration. It's not just God, glory, and gold. The Iberian kingdoms sponsored voyages of exploration for a number of reasons. And this includes adventurous personalities of the leaders and long-term trends in European historical development. But you also have the revival of trade, the struggle with Islam for control of the Mediterranean, curiosity about the outside world, and the alliances between rulers and merchants. The city-states of northern Italy had zero incentive to explore Atlantic trade options because they had an established trade system and an established alliance with the Muslims. And this gives them a monopoly on access to Asian goods because the Italian city-states and the various Muslim empires share. They get along just fine. Also, Italian ships were not exactly made for long distance travel. They're designed for the calm waters of the Mediterranean, and they can't stand up to the violent weather of the Atlantic. The Iberian kingdoms had a history of centuries of warfare with Muslims. They had no significant share in the Mediterranean trade, and thus were willing to seek new adventures, new routes to the east. They had advanced shipbuilding and cannon technology, and they were open to new geographical knowledge. So as you can see, even if Spain has some access, don't forget, guys, all of this, well, not now, but by the 1400s, all of this is going to belong to the Ottomans. Italy controls this, so no matter where Spain goes, they're going to have to pay taxes to somebody. They don't want to do that. And honestly, why would they want to let them? It's all about the Roosevelts. Portuguese voyages. The Portuguese gained more knowledge of the sources of gold and slaves south of the Sahara when their forces, led by Prince Henry, captured the North African caravan city of Ceuta. Prince Henry was referred to as Prince Henry the Navigator. He then sponsored a research and navigation institute at Sagres to collect information about sailing, about traveling, and to also send expeditions to the African lands south of North Africa. The staff of Prince Henry's Research Institute studied and improved navigational instruments, including the compass and astrolabe. They also designed a new vessel called the Caravel. It's a very small size, it's very shallow, and it has a combination of square and lateen sails. And because of the sheer number of cannons that were on the decks, it made it well suited for the task of exploration. Portuguese explorers eventually learned to pick with the prevailing westerly winds that would blow them back to Portugal. And you can compare this to the monsoon wind sailors. This contributes incredibly important knowledge about oceanic wind patterns to the maritime community. The Portuguese voyages eventually produced a financial return, first from trade in slaves and then from the gold trade. Beginning in 1469, the process of exploration picked up speed as private commercial enterprises began to get involved. We'll talk about these later. They're often referred to as a joint stock company. The Lisbon merchant, Gomes, sent expeditions that discovered and developed the islands of São Tomé and explored the Gold Coast. And then Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama rounded the tip of Africa and established contact with India, which would lay the basis for Portugal's maritime trading empire. Portugal will not maintain this trading empire in the Indian Ocean forever, though. We'll talk about why and their downfall next week. So, just some of the amazing inventions, things that were made at Prince Henry the Navigator's school. Very nice, very nice. Look at these voyages, folks. Continuing technology, the astrolabe, better maps, you have the sextant, a better compass, and all these voyages sponsored by Prince Henry the Navigator. Making it around here, that's not bad. But again, then you have Diaz and da Gama. All right, so Portuguese voyages and their entry into the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. And Vasco da Gama sailed for India in 1490. And da Gama would live from 1460 to 1524, so he's still fairly young when he does this. In India, the Portuguese found well-established ports and trading networks, obviously because this trade has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Anyway, the trade city of Malacca was on the Straits of Sumatra and the Malaya Peninsula. The Portuguese did not have tradable goods that the Indians or Southeast Asian rulers and merchants actually wanted. It was junk compared to what was already there. So the Portuguese did what they had to do. They took over trade that was already being controlled by someone else. In other places, the Portuguese just joined in the existing trade without completely taking over everything. Interesting enough, during this time, Siam, which is modern-day Thailand, was attempting to achieve independence from Burma when the Portuguese arrived. We'll talk about that one a little later. In general, the Portuguese made a few converts to Catholicism while they were attempting to take over Indian Ocean trade. And they began to lose dominance in this area by 1600, not because the merchants and rulers of this area were taking it back, but because another European power would rise up. Indian Ocean State. When da Gama arrived in Calicut in 1498, he made a pretty poor impression because he had very simple gifts to give to people, and it was nothing the rulers actually wanted. But the Portuguese were determined to control the Indian Ocean trade network. And unfortunately, their superior ships and firepower gave them the ability to do so. To assert their control, the Portuguese bombarded the Swahili city-states in 1505. So this is in East Africa. They captured the Indian port of Gao in 1510, and they took Hormuz in 1515. Extending their reach to the east, Portuguese forces captured Malacca in 1511, and they set up a trading post at Macau in southern China in 1557. The Portuguese used their control over the major ports to require that all spices be carried in Portuguese ships. And all other ships had to purchase Portuguese passports and pay custom duties to them. Reactions to this aggression were varied. The Mughal emperors took no action because it wasn't a direct threat to their empire. It was just a threat to the trading area around it. The Ottomans resisted and were able to at least maintain some superiority in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Some smaller states cooperated with the Portuguese, others tried evasion and resistance. The Portuguese never gained complete control of the Indian Ocean trade. They did dominate it long enough to bring themselves considerable profit and to break the Italian city-states' monopoly on pepper. All right, we're going to stop there for today. Our next podcast will pick up with the Spanish voyages, as well as the effect this European travel and trade has on West Africa, East Africa, and the Americas. So tune in next time, folks, and have a great night. Cheers.